Hi everyone, I'm Nicole from Inter.link, and we're also a B Corp certified ISP, as well as we've been carbon neutral certified for the last 2 years. So everything that's in this presentation is also our own learning and the steps that we've been taking, and that's what I will be sharing today. What I'll be covering is a brief touch on the relevance of the topic, going through the footprint categories, industry-wide initiatives, the challenges with Scope 3 emissions, and some practical approaches at the end that everyone can take home and apply with their own companies. So we've touched upon sustainability today quite a bit, so the relevance of it is not really debated, but to put a bit of numbers to this to show the depth and the width of the topic. So already in 2020, our industry had 763 million tons of CO2 equivalent emissions, which was already 2% of the global emissions. To compare this a little bit, the aviation industry also has approximately 2% globally, and we always talk about how important it is to travel less and how big of a footprint it is. So our industry has approximately the same amount of footprint globally. Next to this, we're also a high-growth industry. There's always more innovation, capacity increase, more internet usage, new hardwares, innovations coming out. So it's also predicted that this emission will grow to 830 millions of tons of CO2 by 2030. And there are also some projections that if nothing changes and we grow with the status quo and the current pace is maintained and there's no further reductions made, the previously mentioned 2% can grow up to 14% globally by 2040. So we can make quite a big change if we look out for the emissions and we make efforts to reduce these. Just a bit of coverage on what exactly the scopes are and why specifically Scope 3 is that we're focusing today. So Scope 1 is everything that the company can directly control, and it's usually the company's own assets. So it's offices, it's factories. If the company owns vehicles, a vehicle fleet, that's everything goes under this category. Scope 2 is everything that's related to energy use. So for example, if you charge an electric vehicle, this will go under this category, but also all the energy use that's consumed in the data centers goes under this category. And Scope 3 is everything else, so it covers the entire supply chain and every purchase of goods and services that's not covered in the first two categories. So you can already imagine it's quite the big category. To give a bit more insight into this category, you can see the arrows here categorizing the scopes, and everything that's blue there is Scope 3 emissions. It has 15 subcategories. It's quite complex, and there's a lot you can collect and when you look at your own footprint. Just a few industry examples. So this statistics was created by CDP. This is an organization where companies can submit their own footprint data, and this is from 2020. You can see a few industry players here, and what you can also look at is that Scope 1 and 2 categories are marked with orange and green. And well, you cannot see too much orange and green on these slides, so you can see that the extent of Scope 3 categories across various industry players is pretty big. And as every company is different, you can see variability. So the total footprint and the footprint composition regarding the scopes is always different. But one thing is pretty consistent. Scope 3 is always the biggest category. Just to go a little bit more in depth about what are these scopes covering within our industry. So Scope 1, as I mentioned, everything that's company assets. And scope 2 here is still energy use. The subcategories are only showing the category that the energy use is going towards to. And here you can also see that scope 3, on average in our industry, takes up 85% of all company-wide emissions. So this obviously varies per company, but usually this ranges from approximately 70 to 90, even 95% of the total emissions of a company, depending on what they're providing, products, services, and how much they focused already on the first two categories. And as you can see, network equipment, construction, leased assets, for example, purchasing IP transit and such connectivity services, and also operating the network itself goes into this category. And industry-wide, it's important to look at the little pink box in the corner. So the supply chain takes up on average 26 times more emissions of a company than what come from the corporation's own operational emissions. Why is this important? Because the company can actually control their own operational emissions the best. This is something that's very directly within the company's control, whereas the supply chain is much more challenging and it is not under their control. What has been going on in the industry? So there are quite a few initiatives that sprung up in the last few years, mainly because of some recent policies that were born. The Paris Agreement, the CSRD. So CSRD is mainly related or applied to EU countries, but also to non-EU countries who do business with the EU. So there are some specifications or have to reach some specific size of the company or employee count, but also companies outside this region are impacted. And also there's the SECR, which is impacting the UK, which also prescribes or that you have to measure your scope 1 and 2 footprint, have some energy measurements and report them if your company goes into a specific category. And because of this, collectively, there's initiative to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030. And this is quite ambitious. And if you remember that scope 3 on average takes up 85% of all emissions, you know that you cannot reduce 45% without touching scope 3 emissions. So no company will be able to reduce this amount unless they touch scope 3 and really go into the supply chain and work on reducing these emissions. Next to this, there's more efforts on standardizing the efforts, and many companies committed to science-based targets to reach net zero. This is mainly incentivized by the Paris Agreement. So, scope 3 doesn't come without challenges. Just a few of these are, first of all, the complexity of scope 3 emissions. There's many subcategories. It's hard to start. Supply chains are complex. And you also have a lack of control because every other company has its own agenda, own goals, own targets, own focus points. So to really align it with your own takes time and effort and a lot of discussions. And next to this, there are sometimes also data quality issues. There are two big issues. One of them is too much data. You don't know where to look, where to start, and if you collect all the data you think of from your suppliers, you'll drown in the amount of data. And but there's also the challenge of too little data, because there's a lot of companies who do not have the efforts, resources, and time to really look into this, to collect this data, and to share on a level that companies can work with. Despite all the challenges, there are 6 main ways where you can focus your efforts that can help you to tackle scope 3 emissions. And if you look closer to the slides, there are some little green ticks and some of the categories. This only means that Inter.link is focusing at the moment or putting most of its effort in these categories. That doesn't mean that the other categories are not equally important, but every company has to decide for themselves at this point in time, what makes most sense for me, what do I have the resources for, the time for, and decide themselves which ones they want to focus on. So you can prioritize measurement and data collection. So this is the very first and very basic step that companies can do. Without data, you're kind of looking around blind, not sure where to start. Once you have the data, what you can collect, you can see if you have any hotspots. If you have any suppliers that amount for an extensive amount of your supply chain emissions, then you can have a more targeted approach. You can see if there are some low-hanging fruits that are low effort steps that you can take and make those reductions much easier. And this way you can create a strategy, a timeline. So it doesn't sound very exciting, collect data, but it can help quite a lot on the short and long run as well. And you can also ask your suppliers if they have any data, any measurements, and this can also help you along your journey. And in the next slide, I'll also go into a little bit more detail about what data categories you can collect that actually makes the most sense. You can also engage and support suppliers. So there are some projects or reductions that are quite extensive or resource intensive, but if you have other companies that have the same goals and you can collaborate, you can pool resources, and you can set targets together, this can, in a lot of cases, lead to much bigger reductions, and collaborations can really go a long way. But this is obviously for specific products or projects, and every company has different targets. So it's worth to just discuss this and see if you can partner up with someone who might have the same problems, same challenges as you. You can also implement sustainable procurement practices. Quite a few companies do this already, to collect data from their suppliers and rank them based on these metrics regarding how sustainable they are and what the efforts they're doing, and then make their purchasing decision with adding this layer on top of all the other decision criteria. Why this extra hassle is worth it? Because you can prioritize environmentally responsible suppliers, but also from a long-term perspective. If you're buying carbon credits to offset your emissions, sometimes this can be more expensive than previously going with a supplier that might be a bit more expensive on a service level, but they are already carbon neutral, or they're already doing the steps, for example, because in the end, this will be also cost-wise the better decision if you're working with carbon credits. Yes, so what's the data worth collecting from suppliers, and what can you collect? Well, you can collect a lot of data, but not all of them might make sense, especially at the very beginning. So I'll be covering these 4 points, and if you have a look at the first, you see invoices. And I assume everyone is collecting invoices from their suppliers, which is great because this is the very first step that you can take if you don't have supplier data to calculate your emissions. This is called spend-based estimations, and it works with emission factors. Emission factors are usually industry or regional averages. You can download them. They are also accepted policy-wise. You just have to look for the ones that are accepted by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol standards. And with this, you can, without reaching out to your suppliers, already calculate your own footprint. Now, while this is the easiest to start with, this is not as accurate as you can get. It's still widely accepted, and it's a very proper way to start. But because it works with averages, it won't show exactly your company's footprint. So what you can do to improve the accuracy of your measurement is to work with your suppliers, because the next 3 categories are actually data that you can collect from them. So these are all categories that's worth asking for when you discuss with your suppliers. Service level footprint is one of them, and while this is very useful and very nice to have, this is one of the most challenging ones to get or to calculate, because what this calculates is what each customer's footprint is that's created by using your services. So it's quite complex. Unfortunately, there's no standard yet for calculation measures, so it's still on best effort basis. But if a company does this, they're really dedicated to it, so most likely they put a lot of effort into calculating this. So if you ask for it and they have it, that's actually wonderful. What you can also ask for is the targets and goals that they're having. So by which time do they want to be carbon neutral or net zero? So you can align it with your own timeline. And also you can collect electricity use data. So what percentage of renewable electricity do they use, or whatever electricity-related data is important for you and your own calculations. And next to this, you can also look at life cycle assessment. This is something that companies who produce products, for example hardware, will be the ones providing, because this is the life cycle assessment is always product related. So this is from the birth of a product until the end of the life cycle of a product, and how much footprint this creates throughout its life cycle of being in use. This is what it covers. And here on the screenshot, you can see I brought an example from Apple, for example. So they have, this is freely accessible on their website. They have a product environmental report for almost all of their products. So it's worth checking. And the reason why I brought this example is because this is freely accessible. So not every supplier uploads this on their website, but despite you not finding it on their website, you can still ask for it. They might have it, but for example, them calculating it might require some additional data. It might be more customer specific if you asked for some specific product, for example, so they might calculate it separately for you. So it's always worth asking this, because this also makes the measurements much more accurate. And yes, further categories that one can focus on. You can also establish contractual clauses for sustainability. This is also something that I will go into a bit more detail in the next slide, because you can also do a lot with this, but there's just a few pointers that could help you start on this journey, for example. Then you can also promote circular economic practices. This because products don't only just have simply a footprint from the start. These products are being designed. So if the products are already being designed with longevity and recyclability in mind, that also helps a lot on the long run. And also companies actually producing these products can have less cost as well, for example, for using a different material and so on. And it's also worth, if you cannot, for example, resell your used hardware, it's always worth to check if the provider has recycle programs, for example, because a lot of the companies already do. So if you don't just throw this away, but send it back to the provider, this also increases the circular aspect of product use. And since we're also a very intertwined industry, you can always collaborate across the industry, sharing best practices and what you've learned. And there are a few forums for this. So for example, I brought here an example, but there's many more as well. And you can find the one that's closer to the community you're working with, or the companies, or just try to see if there's one that really speaks to you and provides the most aid, for example. Yes, so what can you do with contractual clauses, for example? This is also something that's used more and more by companies, and you do not need to be a legal guru for doing this, so I brought a few examples, and the screenshots are from the Chancery Lane project. They cover a few other jurisdictions as well. For example, in this case, I brought an example for Germany, but they have a quite extensive coverage for England and Wales as a jurisdiction as well. So all the policies that are out that incentivize companies to report or make some specific steps, they follow the newest trends. So you can browse around and you can have a look and see if any of this fits you or sounds interesting, for example. Obviously, there's no one fits all. You will have different priorities than another company, but what you can already focus on, for example, to agree that they will report annually their footprint or reduction measures. So you make sure that the information, you don't always have to reach out, but they will send you, I don't know, at the end of first or second quarter, their footprint, and you can just put it in your database and track their progress, for example. You can also put it in contractually that you would like to have a data center to have 100% renewable energy. They might already have this, so this could be also a very smooth process, but this way you're also ensured that in the future, if they change anything at this data center, you will be ensured that your service will still be covered by 100% renewable energy. You can also set targets for emission reduction. You can do this also together, so this can also be a two-way road, but also this is mutually beneficial because also the reductions that the companies and suppliers are doing on the long run, this will be a worthy investment because this reduces costs in different areas as well, and you as a customer are also happy with the reductions and steps they're making because your footprint is lower. And yes, you can always include waste reduction commitments, and beyond this, you can also get really creative. You can look for inspiration, but these are specific categories that you can start with, for example. And yes, so I think I would say the takeaway of this presentation is that collaboration is key. We're a very intertwined company with very wide supply chains, and it's also you reducing your own footprint reduces the footprint of your clientele as well. So it also creates a trickle-down effect, because if you talk to your suppliers, it reduces your footprint, the client's footprint, and then their client's footprint. So it really is like you reducing your footprint creates a really wide, industry-wide impact. And it's also quite necessary to collaborate together and work together towards this, because as you saw, if you only focus on scope 1 and 2, there's so much you can do. There's a specific border you cannot really cross, cannot reduce further, and what comes after that is then the collaboration with your suppliers, looking at your supply chain, and there's a lot of difference and improvement that you can do focusing in this specific area. So I would close my presentation with let's do this together.
Thank you, Nicole.